One.
Welcome
Hello.
to the Basalt Town Council meeting. We would like to call this meeting to order at 6:06. And Madam Clerk, can we have a roll call?
Absolutely. We'll start with Bernie Brower,
Here.
Rick Stevens, Rob Levitt,
Yes.
Herschel Ross,
Here.
Mark Kittle,
Here.
Gary Tando,
Here.
and Mary Whitsitt.
Yes.
Thank you.
First, I want to say I'm really, really happy to see grassroots back in the room because we have been untelevised and unsupervised for many weeks now. I don't know how long, but we're very happy that you're back. Thank you. Our very first item was recognition of the Citizen of the Year, and that has been postponed until the 27th. So that's that. The next item is council comments, reports, and disclosures. Does anyone on council have a thought, disclosure, comment about the Broncos or
I have
anything?
a report.
Yes, sir.
It says the reports.
Yeah.
No, I'm still being stopped in town at the supermarket. People thanking us for the menorah lighting. I tell them it was all you guys, but it's a great event. Bigger and better next year, and just so you know, people are thrilled with it.
It was awesome. Anybody else? Okay. We are now going to take citizen comments for items that are not on the agenda. Not on the agenda.
Also, you need to add that item of the executive session at the end.
Oh, right. Under something.
I had it.
Oh, gotcha. You almost let me slide. Okay. So on our executive session, we just need to add an executive session, a conference with our attorney for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions in accordance with CRS 246402-4B, in addition to the personnel matters already scheduled. So this is in addition to the executive session. We could have a motion to add that.
So moved.
Is there anybody left for a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Cam.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
That's a little harmony on the barber shop.
It was almost hard. You want to give it another shot? Okay. Okay, so citizen comments for items that are not on the agenda. Anybody? Okey doke. Could we hear a motion to convene as the liquor authority?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are now the liquor authority. Pamela?
Well, the Arts Community Center, this is a renewal of their art gallery permit for this year. They have requested the first of 15 dates that they can request. They have requested 5 dates for this application. Comments from the investigating agencies are written here. There are no concerns from any of the agencies. Planning Department notes that they have not requested outdoor amplified music. It's not included in the approval. If outdoor amplified music is desired, it is required by the planning director. All appropriate fees have been paid, and staff has recommended for approval of this gallery permit.
Council comments or questions? Or
I make a motion to approve. Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. That was the only one, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that our last one, too?
So, yeah, it's,
I make a motion to deconvene.
yay. Is there a
Second.
second? All in
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We haven't deconvened since you were here before.
That'll be your last meeting.
Unconvened.
That's why I wanted to do it, one last deconvene.
Excellent. Okay, this item is, these next couple items are second readings of ordinances, and they are public hearings. This first one is second reading of ordinance number 40, series 2014, an ordinance of the town granting special review approval, a condominium amendment, and historic incentives for the conversion of units 201 and 203 into one residential unit at 104 Midland, Little Snow Building, Basalt, Colorado. James Lind. Hi.
This is a continued public hearing and second reading of an ordinance that will approve of an office conversion to a residential unit. It is in the Little Snell building across the street here. The proposed unit would be a residential unit of about 1,370 square feet. As background, as was discussed at the December 9th council meeting, Staff and the P&Z felt the proposal was consistent with the goals that were coming out of the Downtown Area Advisory Committee to have more people downtown, more beds downtown. Additionally, it meets the parking requirements with the parking reduction for a historic building, historic property. So in total, the P&Z recommended approval with the conditions that are in your ordinance. The council approved the ordinance on first reading at December 9th, and there have been no changes to the ordinance since that first reading. So this evening, staff would recommend taking any applicant comments, as we do have the applicant here this evening, considering public comments as it is a public hearing, and then providing council discussion. Ultimately, the staff recommends approval with the conditions that are in the ordinance. We've got Kay Hagman here this evening representing the applicant group.
I'm here
And Tim walked in behind me here. Do you guys have any additional comments or discussion you'd like to bring?
No, I think all of the recommendations that you did and the planning process of all this is good, and we're ready to put a bed in there.
Sounds good to me. Okay, this is public hearing, so we will open the public hearing at 6:14. If you have a question or comment in the public, just state your name and we will listen. Hearing none, close the public hearing. Council comments, questions?
Mayor, if I may, I just
Yes,
would
sir.
like to note for the record that we received an additional email from Bennett Bramson identifying that he was in support of the proposal.
I saw that. Did everybody see that?
One question. The item 9, once that gets amended on the condo map, then they'll be limited to only one bedroom, correct?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
I also got several comments, emails, and all in favor of this.
Anybody else?
Item.
Seems like the logical thing to do, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're right. So is there a motion from council?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Yes, you have time to go do anything you want still.
Right.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, our next item is also a public hearing and second reading of ordinance number 41, series of 2014. An ordinance of the Town Council of Basalt, Colorado, delegating authority to the town clerk, the responsibility for processing and reviewing certain liquor license matters. Madam Schilling.
Thompson, we put a lot of time into this, and we appreciate that very much. And for council direction, staff has created this ordinance that will delegate the responsibility for reviewing certain liquor matters to the town clerk, which will take it off of your agendas. And staff, after a public hearing, would recommend approval. There are
Just-
no changes to this ordinance.
This is a really interesting ordinance, and basically what it's doing is taking away something that is pretty much administrative work from having to come before the council and letting staff make the decision unless for some reason it needs to come to the council. So I will open the public hearing at 6:17. Anybody? Hearing none, no public hearing, I will close the public hearing and go to council.
I recommend approval.
Is that a motion? Okay. I'm gonna call.
I move.
We had a second, Bernie was. Further discussion?
It's about time.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thank you, Pam. Good work, staff, to think of doing this thing. Yes, sir.
Just for the whoever's watching on TV or the public, there in this ordinance there is a lot of opportunity to appeal to the town council if the administrative action is not what the applicant had hoped for.
Good point, Herschel. Thank you. Okay, now we are looking at our first readings of ordinances, and I'm wondering, is it possible we could discuss 7A and B together?
Sure.
Is
Yes.
that okay?
You can discuss them together and vote on them separately.
Okay, vote on them separately. Judy, did you want to do the presentation?
Not much of a presentation, the same units that we talked about in the executive session on December 9th, and it's just formalizing, so it's the first reading on the minutes for Riverside Plaza.
Maybe just a little bit more for, since the TV works now.
We are not live, however.
That's okay, it would be nice to say it.
They're both one-bedroom units on Riverside Plaza over here, and so we'll be adding more inventory, and hopefully, we're working on housing corporation, which is later discussion tonight, so eventually we'll be moving those into our inventory of the housing, and so we own 2 other units over there currently.
Mike, do you have anything to add?
Nope.
Anybody? Okay. So, council, do you have questions or comments on these? Or is there anything in addition? Yes, Herschel.
The idea is to have these available for our employees, but it's not limited to our employees.
Correct.
That's what.
Anybody else?
I'll move that we approve first reading of ordinance number 1, series 215, approving contract for the purchase of unit 331 Riverside Plaza, lot BC condos located at 355 Gold Rivers Court.
Second.
On first reading and set second reading and public hearing for January 27th, 2015.
He knew that.
Yeah,
Like she said.
I still second.
I was going to say.
He still seconds it. Is there further discussion on this one? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
And
And,
you pretty please do the second unit?
yes.
Yeah,
Right.
I'll make the same first reading. I move that we approve the first reading of ordinance number 2, series 215, approving contract for the purchase of unit 334 Riverside Plaza, lot BC, condominiums located at 355 Gold Rivers Court on first reading and second reading and public hearing for January 27th, 2015.
Second.
Further discussion on this one? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Bernie and Judy. Okay, our next items are work session items. Our town council work sessions are public meetings, and we encourage people to attend to gain insight into the town council's work. Work sessions will typically not have any action items, and thus we won't be having our typical set of public hearings and public comments. For that reason, since this is a town council discussion, we will limit public participation. The goal of these meetings is to bring the town council up to speed on items that they will consider at future legislative meetings and to give the town staff direction. Our legislative meetings are held on the 4th Tuesday of the month. On rare occasions, we will take action on items that are time critical. Tonight, we have several items that are time critical, and we've amended our agenda to include them. Okay? All right, so, Mike, are you going to introduce these items?
So there's 4 of them tonight. The first relates to the Downtown Area Advisory Committee. The second relates to the Basalt Housing Corporation, and sort of like we've taken action to purchase units, so what's our end goal? The third relates to the 2015 work plan, and it's a homework assignment. And the fourth relates to an item that you asked that we bring back in November related to the buffer ordinance, or ordinances is how I would describe it. So that there's a discussion as to the policy. And if you remember, I said there was one specific address, and we really shouldn't legislate on an address. We should legislate on whether or not this buffer is appropriate. And do we also make the same assumptions and regulations related to liquor, which I think was an issue that Herschel might have brought up at that time. So those are the 4 items. Susan's going to kick off the first one. Is there anybody from Downtown Area Advisory? Yes.
Yeah.
We have a few members that were on it, and if we miss something, I don't want them to hesitate to say, oh, by the way, there was this too. But I think we can cover it in a concise enough manner. The one thing that I always try to remind people that we're doing this in steps of 3, so if you go to the very top, move the people, fix the river, come up with a plan. That was then took you to our town planning. our town planning, can we figure out where the public spaces and the private spaces are? And then sort of getting the community to a point where there's a capacity to change, because it will require change as you look at the land use. The Downtown Area Advisory Committee, we then asked them to look at this one option, add details, identify key pieces, and sort of phase the work. I don't know that they got all the way to the phasing the work, but I think they did a really good job of trying to capture what was done in the Our Town planning and then put it on a map, so that now, as a town council, you have a point of reference and the community's been involved in the process. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan for sort of like the next steps and the next pieces. And then we're trying to leave as much time as you need to talk about areas of concerns, the things that we don't see that we would like to see, and sort of, is this the right sequence?
So the P&Z and the town council had a presentation from Paul Anderson, who was hired by the dock group itself to facilitate their work. And I heard that on December 18th, and my goal is that at the January 27th meeting, we're going to have a resolution that's going to establish the next steps. So the charge, Mike gave me a couple different charges, and that's kind of the piece that I'm going to summarize today. But I'm not going to, when we adopted the resolution that established dock, it had two pieces. It had establishing dock, and then it had conducting the scientific survey. So the results of the survey, we took some of the excerpts and we included it in your packet. Doc had the availability of the survey results kind of towards the end of their work. And most of our discussion today is really going to talk about the doc report. Now, remember the doc report kind of had three pieces. It had finding and recommendations that address this connectivity between the downtown and the rivers through visual and physical access, improving Alliance Park, allowing density to drive revitalization, and putting you there. So that was the report that Paul went over. They also advocated a concept map that's included in the report that's shown here. And then they also had kind of the vision boards that were showing the ideas and themes that they would like carried out in that work. What Mike asked me to do was kind of start talking about the more technical aspects, kind of starting with the physical constraints, which isn't necessarily the most exciting stuff. So what we were doing is kind of making a list of items that could be the next steps in the process. And the ones that are above this yellow line here are more physical and legal. What are the physical constraints and what are the legal constraints for implementing this plan? For example, we know that the Panafork site is zoned only for mobile homes, so that's kind of a constraint to implementing that plan. Also, kind of what is the water and sewer in the area? Kind of a major theme of all this is with Mike is let's give the work back. So giving the work back means giving it to our existing committees. So on this chart, which was in your packet, here's kind of the signing task to our different boards. For example, P&Z, looking at the zoning in this area and how to change it to reflect this plan. And part of that is looking like it will include kind of looking at the existing CSC zone district that we created a couple years ago and tweaking it for the Cannon Fork, and then potentially looking at a form-based code for the rest of the area. Are we going to need master plan amendments? Giving to Post, for example, the Two Rivers Road master plan, giving to the Wiley Arts Center and the new Arts Council, kind of the arts component. And remember, in the survey, arts was, big, some kind of, it was repeatedly brought up of significant support for arts. Bach to rebind and create affordable housing. And asking dock members potentially to meet with some of the property owners in the area to further the plan. So that's kind of getting the work back to the different existing commissions. And this last section has to do with the financial. How are we going to fund it? What are the benefit cost analysis? What are we going to include in our capital improvements plan? So this is more, obviously more technical. So kind of what we were hoping today to accomplish is really, one, we're assuming that you can support the doc plan, but if there's some items that you want to talk about more, we'd like you to flag them. We probably, just given the length of this meeting, wouldn't be able to make much progress on that, but we want to flag them. And then kind of talking about what are your next big 3 items that you want to accomplish, going back to what Mike wants with the 333. And in those items, where the plan is to give them back to our existing committees. Also the Public Arts Commission, which we didn't really get going, created it last year, and of course, Tom Smith and staff would also be involved with implementing that. So that's kind of what we have planned, and we are hoping really that this is an opportunity for the council to discuss. It's not an opportunity to re-present the plan or public comment, because we thought really that the council would benefit from some internal discussion about what they're feeling comfortable with and where they want to go. Yes, Steve?
Well, I was on the committee and you asked if we had any input. Is this an appropriate time to do that?
Actually, probably not. We just sort of read a thing that said the council hasn't really had an opportunity to discuss this at all, whereas lots of members of the community have. So this is kind of our time right now. We are welcome to stay and listen and grab us outside.
I misunderstood. You said if we were on the committee and we wanted to, say something to add that Susan may not have brought up, maybe we would have an opportunity to do that.
I didn't hear that, but whatever the council wants, if you want to
Sure.
open it up and let
Sounds
the
good.
public
Well,
talk.
I think it'd
I
be
didn't
fair
say
if Steve wants to make a comment that I didn't.
Yeah,
You read that.
we were in council, we had meetings for 8 weeks, Susan, or 9, whatever it was. First of all, I want to thank the council for allowing us to create the committee and for giving me the privilege of serving on it, and it was hugely important. But maybe out of all that came out of those meetings, I think it would be important that, number one, we never actually picked which one of those findings and recommendations were our key issues, which was the most important. And in truth, allow density to drive revitalization was the most important. And how we integrated the town with this new revitaled population was basically putting the there, improving Lions Park, and everything else was what do we do with the density once we have it. And we were reminded that as the trailer park was cleared, we lost approximately 300 citizens from the community, perhaps of a certain demographic. And so the loss of that demographic has had impact on a number of areas in town. And it also changed the demographics of our community, since we're only 3,600 citizens. The demographics of our area is now older, whiter, and more affluent. That's pretty much what we inherited when the trailer park was empty. And so in your challenge of trying to interpret our interpretation, I think that's something you're going to have to think about. What has happened to our town? Where do you see it going? And how are you going to make that happen?
Anybody else? council? I guess what we're looking for is where do we go from here, kind of comments? Gary?
You know, when I was listening to Paul Anderson kind of talk about the process with the dock committee and everything else and how it moved from, you know, potentially more contentious to kind of more consensus on this kind of planning process. You know, I look at this map and it's you know, it's kind of where I wanted to go with it. Obviously, you know, I'm always on the more open and park place, but I was also very open to looking at how you mix new development into the downtown core. And I agree with Steve. And, you know, that didn't really get mentioned much was we've got to find a way to have people downtown, but people of all, you know, economic, social, income levels, and you know that's going to be a critical component to how we do this and how we zone this coming up in the future. Is because, you know, I look at some of this stuff and then I saw what, you know, the developer potentially had planned and stuff, and I just want to make sure that, because that's the way I'm going to be voting, is, you know, trying to take what the community created, and I really appreciate this, and I think it's impressive. I was very impressed to see how everyone could get together and, you know, with council picking and some P&Z members. It was definitely a mix of the community involved in the DAC, but I'll be very interested to see how you could take this concept, zone it appropriately, and then work with the developers and work with all of our financial issues that we're going to have going forward to truly, you know, do something like this. I know it's not going to look perfectly like this, it's a concept, but, and then, you know, the big key is too, we heard it at that time, is, and I see it written down there, is working with the other landowners in that area. You know, there's some big changes potentially to Lions Park, but, you know, there are big bubbles on property that the town does not own, and the developers weren't really in the room. The owners of that property weren't really in the room. So that's going to be a key component to the future. I think in the end it could benefit everybody, because if we can find a way to make all of this happen, you know, it's kind of exciting. I'm not in a massive rush to make it all happen now, because I really think there's a lot of detail to be put into this. But, you know, I at the end of this and at the end of the Paul Anderson thing, you know, talking to some of the DAC members, I felt pretty comfortable where we're at. And I really felt, you know, energized by the community being able to come together, at least to get to this point. I'd love it to see it get to the next steps, you know, and it's like, you know, you're going to try to determine the council's list of the next 3 steps without giving us, you know, some recommendations. I think you're going to have, we're only 6 here tonight, but you're going to have a lot of people who, you know, have a lot of different steps to take. But personally, for me, the next steps to take is to really look at how we're going to zone this, and then how we're going to work with, you know, the Wiley, the you know, the CDC, the Lowe's, and all of these land owners on the other side. How we're going to work all together to get this vision into something that can become reality sometime. I'd like to see more than near future, but I'm not in a rush to make it happen tomorrow. So,
Thanks, Gary. Herschel.
I'd like to, of course, recognize all the time and the effort that the DAC put into this. It's great, but also looking at what could be involved with implementing the recommendations. I think there's some real clear thinking from the staff here, and it does lay out responsibilities. It does, as Gary was saying, definitely give us a feeling for what we have to do next. We have to look at the the kinds of things that are included in the plan and the appropriate zoning. It does give us some steps to go forward. But the other thing that I just love about that chart is that it's keeping the community involved. When we look at the spirit and the energy that started with all of those people coming by out of the storefront and doing drawings and some quite elaborate ideas of what might happen, the interest and the enthusiasm, and then the hard work of DAC. Having our existing committees help us to address these problems, I think this is laid out really beautifully. And so I feel like there is a diagram for us to go forward here. And then the other thing that I've been hoping for all along, and it seems to actually be happening, is that if the community could come up with a plan which is conceptual and isn't all that detailed. This gives a developer who wants to come forward and actually make these things happen a blueprint. Now, obviously, as Gary said, it's going to have to be tweaked around because they have to make it a profitable application. But all of these different things and the various for-profit and non-profit of people who are really going to make this happen with the encouragement and the help of the town have a map. And if they get close to it, the best thing that we can offer to them, the best carrot we have a lot of sticks, but the best carrot we have is if you can come in with something that the community really wants, we can really help you get through the process.
Thanks, Herschel. Other humans?
Yeah,
Yes,
you guys,
Ron.
we got to put some there, okay? Mike wants 3 things that we're going to do, and we can talk about what a great job DAC did and how nice it is to work with Post and all our other committees, but we need a plan. This is our chance to figure out what we're going to do next. Somewhere, Mike, you talked about meeting with Lowe's, and that's pretty much the top of my list. And right below that would be talking to the Clark's Market people and see where they stand in all this. Because we can't redevelop the land if we don't have the land or they're not interested. So there's 1 and 2 on my list. If that helps.
And I have a couple theirs. My first one is that we talked about this a little in depth, Mike and I, and also on the mayor's cabinet, about there's going to be an interim time frame here that may be long because there's a lot of money, a lot of reimbursables that have to come back to the town, and summer and our community don't want to see this looking like this for a year, 2 years, the way it is. So I would say my very high priority is to make the parcel at the river look and be very safe, seeded, planted in some way so that it will be a draw immediately to get people downtown. The way it looks and has looked, because it's a construction zone, has not been something appealing. And those of us who've been around for 100 years know that parts of the Willits approval still sit with big holes and big weeds, and we cannot have that down here. We have got to either sod it, seed it, or something while it waits for whatever happens. And I think we could make that a really wonderful place for an interim sort of deal. My other deal in question, I guess, is I would like to have some staff clarification on, we talk about form-based code versus a development application, and I would like to hear a little bit about more about the form-based code and more about the timing between creating the code and reviewing an application. Or are we really going to be developer-driven like we've always been, where the developer's going to tell us or suggest to us or apply, and then we're going to just tweak what they give us?
Well, in the case of Lowe's, we actually had a developer show up before we even had a plan.
Exactly.
And so with them, you're trying to fit them within your current zoning framework. And so you know what their parcel looks like, and you know sort of what restricts it. And as Susan said at the beginning, the two things that we know for sure is one, it's zoned for a trailer park, and two, it's still in the floodplain. So we haven't done a letter of map revision for that parcel, nor have we changed the zoning. If you look at the CSC, and I think it was one of the DAC members that pointed out, you know, we have a zoning district which we've established that could really work well with that parcel. But if you sort of go with your downtown will take a long time to develop and redevelop, then you have time to establish a form-based code, which is actually a definition of everything from the type of street furniture you have to the sidewalks, to the setbacks, to the heights of the building, to what the building materials are used, to what the form looks like. And when you look at that central core, whether it was DAC or people that were in the Our Town planning process, it seemed as though the community would allow all kinds of form and density in that section. We had people with 5- and 6-story buildings, and as much density as you could see. And I would say Gino's group, what's the high school kids?
Youth-entity.
Youth-entity probably had the most that you could put in there, and none of that seemed to scare anyone in the community. And I think for the people that own the property, if you can see a denser development pattern, there's a higher probability you get to a number that you're willing to sell your property for. If it's a lower density, the square footages don't yield enough in either lease or income from sales to allow you to get to a purchase price. So I think within what I would call the Clark's market area, it's ideal to start developing a form-based code, knowing that that's going to take a little longer. We own the parcel in the triangle, so the town can say, this is going to be developed based on a form-based code. So when you start looking at the pieces that are around us, we have time to build a form-based code for the downtown corridors that are specific to those properties. And then we have an existing zoning class that we could use for the CDC parcel. And one of the things that we did as staff is I was asking them what are the next 3 things you all think we need to do in the downtown? And we came up with 30 ideas. But the one we all came back to was the one that Tom brought up a couple. The first was you got to put in place the zoning for the parcel that you think is going to develop the soonest, so that people know what it's zoned or what they could be zoned, because that's about giving people rights to develop the property. The second thing, which imagine that it came from the town attorney, was this discussion of how to create these pedestrian connections to the downtown. And when we get to the 2015 work plan, I'll talk about that a little bit. But we have the pieces that allow us to take into account people that might have an application before us in the next, let's say, 3 to 6 months, as well as the long term. But I would urge you to think about the long term, because when I look at this list of projects that are important, I put Two Rivers Road really high on the list in terms of what that road could be if it has a bike ped component, and how it works to tie to Willits, and how it works to really create some there in the downtown corridor.
And one other thing, Mike, is, I mean, this to me doesn't necessarily look prioritized, and it doesn't necessarily look mostly like policy. It looks like something staff would prioritize. So I'm not even sure what my question is here, except for, do you have a recommended priority of things that have to be done legally or engineering-wise versus,
Yeah.
because, you know, I'm all over
Right.
that
What I-
road. I mean,
What I was looking for is exactly what Rob said. I'm interested in knowing what Lowe's has and what the owners of Clark's Market want to do with their property and what those possibilities are. So I've, in my mind, mentally put, okay, that's one. The one that I heard tonight that's really not written down, which is just as important, is sort of this, how do you maintain a mix of housing? So the Lowe's application might not have that mix of housing. How would we encourage that mix of housing to be a part of that application or a part of some of the other parcels? Because having a mix of people that live in the downtown is really important. You don't really, that's one of those things that is that number 2? Is that one of those things that we should purposely put in our plans and request when people come to us? And then it's sort of in search of like the number 3.
Well, we don't have comment from Mark and
Yeah.
and Bernie yet.
Okay, Mark.
Well, I would say that we need to prioritize what we can control. Clark's Market, we have no control over, so we should start with what we started, Vanderport. Real America is gonna be a good opportunity for some affordable housing. I think that would be important to pursue that venue as well. If the owner of the Clark's Market area wants to come in, sure, we're gonna entertain them, but in the interim, I would say put that on the back burner unless someone's interested. So concentrate on Vanderport, Real America, and the town hall location. Maybe, do some studies and come up with. And as far as the infrastructure on the Vanderport, that's already done, correct?
Yeah, except
Susan
for
said something about sewer and water.
what would come in with the development.
So that's the things that we need to finish, the stuff that we started. in my opinion.
Thanks, Mark. Bernie?
I have a question, Mike. When is the town's piece of the park, which is next to the river, going to be ready for public occupancy?
Our hope is to get it seeded, irrigated, and planted for the spring. And then on that list, you'll see, is it about 8th down, Susan?
This create plan for construction documents, is that
Right.
on the other
Yeah,
side?
create park plan and construction documents for the riverfront. So we'll get it seeded. We'll probably put in a trail very similar to what you see along the frying pan by the swinging bridge, and then start working with Post to come up with what those park elements are down there. So that would be sort of the next work that Post would work on.
And another little tiny minor piece that is just that we have a lot of restoration work on Old Pond Park that has to happen. And we'll be having Post kind of look at whether some of the elements, they're supporting some of the elements as being consistent with the policies that we have here. So for example, the little demonstration garden that was there is being proposed not to be part of the plan. So Post will look at that.
And I guess just to follow up a little bit, I agree with Mark that you can only address what you have control over, but I think that if we don't do a code for the whole of downtown, the form-based code, we're gonna be driven around like a truck, like we used to be. So even though we can't maybe do it right now, I think it's a really high priority that we at least say what we wish it would look like. Otherwise, I just don't see how this is different than every other year.
The good news is this very map has already had an impact on Lowe's in terms of what they're proposing, what their drawings look like. So by the very fact that you have something that's been developed by the community, it already has sort of, they understand the importance of connecting the river to the downtown. They get why that's important. They understand that you don't want an urban edge on Two Rivers Road where you put a lot of massing, that it has to be more porous, that you have to be able to look through the buildings to the river. So I would tell you that DAC and the Our Town planning process has already impacted the developer. And the more we engage and continue that, the more we continue to plan with Post and the P&Z, and the more of those plans we can put out there, the more you can direct that development. You're almost telling them, this is the vision for the communities, these are the ideas we would accept. And you don't even have to say no, you just say, see that map? How close can you get to that map?
Well, and the one other thing that we talked about in the mayor's cabinet is the fact that it would be possible to have more frontage view and put more density farther downstream, I guess that would be. And Mike even had thought about it, I think suggested like turning the buildings sideways, setting them sideways, so like an ocean front where everybody has a view of the river versus putting them butting them up to the sidewalk and the road. So, I mean, I think there's some ways to get more riverfront view than what this particular diagram is showing. And I also thought when Steve was talking about that we've gotten really white around here lately, that if you
And old.
and old, we don't say the old word, but if you drive around this community up and down the valley, if you want to see some other color or age besides us, go to the soccer fields where you will see lots and lots of color and lots of mixing. And you probably won't see too much of that in any retail store in Basalt or any restaurant in Basalt for the most part. So I just say, keep that in mind, that what different cultures want is not necessarily what we want. Some of us want high-end restaurants or just a restaurant we can afford or something like that. Other people want to be out on the river, which if you go up the frying pan or down to any of the riversides here, you will see a different bunch than us.
I'll just continue my comments, if I may. For me, the single most important achievement of the DAC is the vision of the open vision from the river to the town and keeping that site plane clear. And that probably definitely means removing Wiley and the town hall from its present location and figuring out a use. But I think this vision is a better, higher vision than the one I originally had, which was to build housing or a hotel on Lions Park. And I would support this better, higher vision for Basalt. And that, to me, is this map and that vision are the key things that the citizens coalesced on and brought to us. And I noticed in the map that they presented, they had 6 different open plazas mapped out for public activity. And if you look at your survey, the combination of passive park, no building, this is for the Pannon Fort, and for active park, no building, that's the biggest single block, that's 47%. And then if you look at the possible uses, the biggest single block, 48%, is town makes significant upgrades to public spaces with art installations. And I would totally support that as a way to activate this park through art. And we're looking at, we've adopted a budget that gives us $800,000 in economic development and other money, and we have leftover bonding money. We have the money to make this a first-class, active art and park space for art lovers and families and people to bring them to the park and to bring them downtown. I think the rest of these details we have to work out, but I think those are the 2 big picture items that I want to keep in focus. I'm not sure that the CSC zoning is totally appropriate because it was designed for a big hotel and a nonprofit organization, and if they did certain things, they got excess density and height, which, I'm not necessarily against per se, but I think it has to be appropriate to the park, and we may have different requirements for the Clark space, may be a more fitting place for higher densities and higher levels. But I just want to say thank you to the DAC for giving us this vision of how to proceed.
Okay, have you heard enough, or
May I?
for now?
Sorry,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
I'll be pithy.
I haven't heard enough.
Well, the diversity of the housing issue, I think, falls really well under 8B. Or maybe we've covered it here, but I just made notes. I want to echo what Jackie said about an interim plan for the park. We don't want to make people live through a construction site forever. And what's short-term in government years is not necessarily short-term for the people. So,
Like geologic time.
And the second thing I put in my notes is we need a fiscal discussion.
Right.
How much money do we have? Can we buy? Can we afford all the things that we're talking about? So I think that's somewhere in the top 5 of my list.
I agree. Second that.
So do you have what you need? Can you relay that back to us somewhere?
It will be in the resolution
Okay.
on January 27th.
Ted has a quickie.
First, my apologies for being a little late. I thought this started at 7:30, not 6:30, so, my bad. I misunderstood the email. All I want to say is that you empowered 10 citizens to basically look over your shoulders, and we will be doing that. We invested an awful lot of time and energy into our recommendations, and we know they're not final. We will work very closely with you, positively or negatively, as things progress, to ensure that we implement our vision, the community's vision for Basalt.
We hope lots more will be looking over our shoulders, too.
Thank you.
Okay, Basalt Community Housing Court.
So if you take the Steve and Gary conversation of 20 minutes ago, a lot about establishing the Basalt Housing Corporation has to do with how you start fitting affordable community housing into this area. At the same time, trying to address the needs of housing for employees as well as employers that are trying to get employees in the community. We've acquired a number of properties. We continue to work on what the best type of corporation is. I will tell you that the tug and pull is between two issues. One has to do with TABOR, which is the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights in Colorado, and related to appropriations of monies on an annual basis. And then you have the IRS code that you're trying to comply to if at some point in the future the housing corporation would like to issue debt to take on a project. So we continue to work on that, understanding that there is, the more you make it an independent housing corporation, the more it can't be the town. So you end up with the town manager and the town attorney sitting on this side saying these are the ordinances that can be drawn up to develop this corporation, and these are the powers that we have to appoint the board and to remove the board. But that board has to be independent of the town under Colorado state statute. And so you'll end up seeing a completely different board represented by a completely different set of attorneys, and ultimately they go pick their own attorneys and their own people to help run them because it's a community housing corporation. So something that we thought might take 6 months might take a little longer, because the important thing is to set it up right in the beginning and try to anticipate what the future could be for it. As you look at sort of the development of this, we have a number of nonprofit housing corporations that have approached us about potential projects. A couple we've identified on maps that they're already starting to work on. And we have the Rhonda project that we're currently working on, and then we have what I would call Pitkin Southside projects that Pitkin County wants to work on. And how does all this housing work together? Hence, making sure we do a good job. So if you remember when we had the session on Rhonda's property, we divvied up the building, you know, how do those units go back into the housing corporation? And it's getting that form of corporation established so that it's separate from the town but yet controlled by the town. If you
But
don't
you were
like,
saying it was not controlled.
well, you want to be able, if they run amok, to get rid of them or disband them. But you have to give them the authority to do things. And so it's making sure that we create the right board for this community, not necessarily just the right board. So we'll work on it some more, but understand it's all interrelated, that affordable housing component will be a big part of the downtown, and to make sure that we do it right. So it's the John Muir quote at the top left. If you think you're going to pull one thing out and it's not connected, it is.
Is it structured, or is the relationship similar to like the Pitkin County Open Space Board and the county?
No, it would be more like APCHA and Aspen.
Okay. And how is it born and funded?
It can be funded by grants made by the town as well as contributions of property.
Got it. Okay. Anybody?
Yeah, open space and trails hasn't been a great success. I
Oh, no,
sorry.
right.
I'm town council over here, say whatever you want. I'll get you later.
Okay, so Mike, the 2015 work plan is the homework, and we're going to talk about
Yeah.
that.
That's the homework. So there's a 2014 work plan update, and it's on the town's website. Just go to the town manager and click it. We'll send out another copy, provided it to all of the employees. So 71% of our 2014 work plan was accomplished. If you go to the top of the list, those are the items we didn't. So if you roll them over into 2015 to complete, then I need you to rank, and I believe there's 23, Susan? 25 different sort of like project areas, 1 through 5, 1 being it's really important to me, 5 not as important, and then everything in between. And then as you put those together, send them back to me. We rank out all of these, and then we build them into a plan. And if you sort of remember, we have 5 strategic goal areas. One's economic vitality, one's excellence in governance, one is safe and caring places,
Planning resiliency.
And what's the last one?
Economic vitality.
Fiscally responsible.
Fiscal responsibility. So they all fit into sort of those areas, and that's how the color coded in terms of where we think they fit.
When is this due?
Next Wednesday, if you could.
And what's one? One is the most important?
One, the most important.
And is somebody going to bug us about this, I hope?
Yes,
Okay.
Pam would love to bug you.
Bird dog, I like that.
I'll
Okay.
check with you daily.
So
Did
buffer
you mention the
ordinance.
ag stuff?
Buffer.
Ordinance. So in November, this item was on the agenda, and the council asked that I bring it back for further discussion and consideration. So that's what I'm doing tonight. And that particular night, I said, this was brought up on a specific address. And while this specific address, you can address it, it's better to have a broader policy discussion because there's other addresses that I'm sure are impacted in some way or another. So that it's not just a discussion